But starting today, our focus is on something else. Our focus is on the next release of Mac OS X, which is called Tiger. Tiger is the 5th major release of OS X, following Cheetah, Puma, Jaguar, and Panther.
Today's video is going to be about the 20th anniversary of Mac OS X Tiger's retail release for PowerPC, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, I wanted to kind of go over everything you got with the retail release of Mac OS X Tiger on day one in 2005. The very first thing to note is that this is a big box release. In 2005, Mac OS X software updates and big OS releases weren't available via downloads or the internet. They were only available in retail packaging like this on shelves in CompUSA, Circuit City. All the kind of big computer stores of the day carried these big boxes, which is what you would go to on day one to get your update so that you can update your iMac G3 or Power Mac G4. All of any kind of Mac you had in the early 2000s, you needed one of these big retail boxes. And what's fun about these retail boxes is it contains a lot of like unique information about the operating system's release, including a lot of callouts to features. All that kind of stuff is all detailed in this pretty high quality box as well. Has a standard designed and engineered by Apple in California side. The other interesting part is I noticed that most of the box was apparently assembled in the USA, probably printed elsewhere, although there's other material within the box that we'll get to that's actually printed in the US as well. The only thing I currently know of that Apple produces in the US is the Mac Pro, the current big desktop Mac Pro. So it's kind of interesting to see something as simple as this old retail release back in 2005. Apple's actually trying to assemble it in the US, which is kind of an interesting take for Apple. One of the interesting parts of this, because it was obviously sitting on the shelf and people had to kind of know what they were going to possibly be purchasing, are these key features. That's why I feel like Tiger is such a foundational element to Apple's future success after 2005, leading into things like the iPhone and the iPad. Tiger is really where a lot of the technologies that you saw in those platforms and in operating system updates in the future all kind of started here. Big features like Spotlight, something like iChat AV, which eventually led into FaceTime, and all the other big FaceTime features that we all kind of take for granted now, all started back in Mac OS X Tiger. Other big features include the .Mac Sync feature, which included iDisk, which allowed you to store files on a Dropbox-like syncing system and access them from any Mac that you owned or anywhere else you might be that had access to a Mac. You could access those files that you had put onto iDisk. I know this kind of .Mac as a service has sort of a spotty past with Apple and Apple enthusiasts because some people really disliked the way it was implemented and its features base, especially for the time. I personally had .Mac. I really enjoyed it as well, and I thought that at the time it was really unique, especially as a first-time Mac person who kind of got into Mac actually in Mac OS X Tiger days when I bought my first MacBook laptop. That was the all-black MacBook when Apple finished the Intel transition. It was really cool to see features like .Mac Sync, which really didn't exist too much, at least in my world, on the Windows XP and Microsoft side. It was all through third parties. It wasn't something that like Microsoft was offering as a service to using Microsoft Windows. Talking about Intel and PowerPC, Tiger sits in this unique element of Apple's overall timeline where Tiger was released when Apple was still producing PowerPC computers, and Tiger was also the first operating system that Apple released for Intel platforms. So it was one of the only operating systems to really be offered in both platforms. I believe Leopard was offered, and then if I remember correctly, Snow Leopard was the last operating system to support PowerPC, or it might have been the first operating system to only do Intel, but Tiger kind of, again, foundational to Apple's future. It was the bridge between PowerPC and Intel. So that's why I love Tiger. It's such a interesting part of Apple's history and so much fun little sandboxes that Apple built as well. Things like Dashboard, which we'll get to in this video and in some other future videos I plan on doing, where Apple laid the groundwork back in 2005 for key iPhone OS apps, and the first apps on iPhone were kind of started in Dashboard, where you see in like the Stocks app and this Weather app both have very similar and very direct lineages to the iPhone OS 1.0's stock and weather app. It all started here because from what I've seen and what I've heard from different podcasts, and I believe there's a Computer History Museum oral history video about this, of Dashboard was the time when Apple engineers were trying to experiment with what would a mobile app look like. This was also when Apple was still trying to suss out if web technologies was best for the iPhone or if native technologies were. Obviously native won out, and that's how we got Cocoa Touch and all the Cocoa frameworks brought over to the iPhone. But at the time of Tiger and Dashboard in particular, this is where they were messing around with, okay, can we build a mobile application all with just web technologies? Which is really fascinating because you see even little carryovers from this dashboard, little things like animations when you flip the widget over to get to the settings. All of that was also available on iPhone OS and all the initial iPhone apps. So that's really fascinating with Tiger, is so many bricks related Tiger that eventually led to future Apple products. Even big features like Spotlight, which was first introduced in macOS and Tiger, still lives today, not only in macOS, but on the iPhone and the iPad and even the Vision Pro. All of those platforms all still use Spotlight, and while the technology underpinning Spotlight has updated and been changed over the years, the actual first release of all of that feature of Spotlight was in Tiger. Other big features of Tiger that was popular at the time was this kind of change in iChat AV that allowed you to visually see all the people you were video conferencing with in this 3D view. I know even today there are sometimes like different podcasts and different videos I watch where they complain about like the grid layout of Zoom or other video chatting apps. And it was so interesting to see again when I opened up and was kind of previewing this video and prepping for it, that iChat AV back in 2005 had this unique kind of perspective on how we can kind of display people on a video conference call in a way that is a little bit more interesting and maybe a little bit more realistic to how someone would be if you're sitting around a table. But yeah, so that was everything that you kind of got to see on the outside of the retail packaging for macOS and Tiger. So now why don't we jump into what was actually included in the box on release day. So here we go, we're going to open it up. The fun part of these early big box releases of macOS and Tiger was that they open up to this book kind of packaging, which is I always thought was interesting. So we'll kind of take all this out and make some room so we can kind of go over through everything. Very first thing, of course, included is your DVD install of macOS and Tiger, which also includes Xcode 2 on the disk. I was always fascinated to see these earlier versions of macOS that was a little bit more developer focused and a little bit more developer friendly, where they would include things like Xcode right on the operating system install, or other like languages such as PHP and Perl just within the operating system on first install were all available. Another thing included in the box was a trial version of iWork 05. It's interesting to note that iWork 05 at that point didn't include the Numbers application, which is Apple's answer to Excel, essentially, to the Apple iWork platform. At this point, it was just Pages and Keynote. Two really great applications, but at least for me personally, whenever I think of iWork, I think of Numbers because I've used it so much over the years in all of my day jobs that it's so weird to see a piece of iWork software not include Numbers right out of the gate. One of my favorite parts of this packaging is the .Mac promo that was included that highlights all of the key features that you would get if you subscribe to .Mac with the macOS 10 Tiger update. Again, one of the big things was synchronizing all of your content with all of your Macs if you had a desktop at home or a laptop on the go. A big part of .Mac was being able to sync all that content, your calendar, your contacts, all of that was synced within .Mac. And again, for me personally, it worked really well at the time. Maybe I'm just not remembering all the little gotchas that I experienced at the time when I was a subscriber to .Mac. But again, just super interesting to see the initial foundation, again, released in Tiger of .Mac, which eventually led into MobileMe and eventually led into iCloud, which now is this huge platform for Apple and even Apple developers to kind of use. It all started with .Mac back in 2005 with macOS 10 Tiger's release. This is the big walkthrough booklet that will go through all of the features. I'm going to save this for a second as we go through some of the other little things like the software coupons, which were kind of fun memories of the past. These were included in case you ever wanted to send in for a promotion for a future update or piece of software. These coupons would kind of prove that you own macOS 10 Tiger and you in theory could maybe get a discount if the manufacturer or Apple was kind of linking the physical purchase of Tiger with your future purchase of another piece of software. So these are kind of fun blasts from the past to see. AppleCare service was also included in the retail packaging that outlined kind of what you were getting with AppleCare if you subscribed with everything. I thought it was kind of interesting because I didn't know if you got AppleCare when you purchased the retail copy of Tiger. I know when you bought like a new Mac, it was obviously offered, but I think this is more so highlighting like, hey, AppleCare service and guideline this is everything that you get when you subscribe to AppleCare back in 2005. You get the license agreement in a lot of languages, and an install guide that, interesting enough, is like printed in kind of less quality paper. Some of it's black and white, some of it's color. It's definitely interesting to see this install guide because obviously today most operating system updates and installs are pretty easy and just kind of straightforward and done for you. But back in 2005, you had a little bit more room to play with your install and customizing it. So it's kind of interesting to see this particular layout, including like how to set up telephone modem information, what each kind of setting is. Even tells you things like if you need to manually configure the IP address for your computer, the number that looks like this, and it kind of gives you an example. Really cool, interesting things to see that were obviously very useful for people in 2005 who maybe this is their first Mac, or maybe this is even their first time getting on the internet. 2005 is maybe a little late. Maybe they were getting off of AOL and first time using broadband. So definitely interested to see this install and setup guide. Okay, the last thing included was the walkthrough booklet, which is this really high quality booklet that was printed in the USA again, which is kind of interesting. And it goes right into the key features of macOS 10 Tiger with, of course, the big flagship feature of Spotlight, which also reminded me that Spotlight was actually available as the standalone window back in early versions of macOS 10, where you could do all of your searching within this Spotlight window that was separate from the menu pull down or even the integration with Finder. It's definitely something that I'd totally forgotten about, but it's really interesting to see again. Along with Spotlight, the other big feature was Dashboard. I have another video coming out that kind of goes more in depth into the technical aspects of Dashboard and some of the fun elements of Dashboard and how it was related to the first iPhone. But again, Dashboard was such a fun sandbox Apple built that anyone could kind of build a widget for. With these widgets all being backed by web technologies, it wasn't as heavy as having to build a whole Cocoa application from scratch. So it opened you up to be able to build a lot of like internet connected applications without all the overhead of Cocoa, and allowed you to kind of distribute them a lot easier than Cocoa applications that were distributed at that time. I think if I remember correctly, even Apple's website had like a Dashboard quote unquote app store. I mean, all of the widgets were free from what I remember, but it was this layout of all these available widgets that you could easily download and install into your system. And it was kind of like a widget directory. But yeah, so Dashboard's one of my kind of favorite features of Tiger, honestly. And I have another video, like I said, coming out going into all the cool parts of Dashboard. And I think it's going to be something that I explore as I do more videos in the future as well. There are also some interesting updates to Safari in Tiger that I hadn't remembered being associated with Tiger in particular, including Safari RSS first introduction being in Tiger. I definitely would have thought RSS integration within Safari would have been an earlier version of macOS, but I guess 2005 is right around that time when blogs were becoming more popular and people were trying to use RSS as a way to follow all these different blogs. So it was really great to see RSS included in Safari. If I remember correctly though, myself, I probably didn't use it too much back in 2005 when I first started using Macs. And I also didn't realize that the Safari released in Tiger was also the first time that you could view PDFs without having to download them from websites, which is a great feature. Private browsing is another one that kind of surprises me, having thought that it would have been a future version of macOS that included private browsing. So it's kind of interesting to see a big key feature like private browsing that is available now everywhere on every device you use being introduced here in Safari on macOS 10 Tiger. Again, one of my favorite, early macOS and Apple ecosystem items is .Mac. It's really great to see all these kind of features laid out. It's also really great to see iSync here outlined within the .Mac Sync feature, where you can see it being used not only with Apple devices and services like .Mac or in the iPod, but with other phones and Motorola Razrs and other devices that weren't Apple branded, but could talk and communicate over the iSync application to transfer data between your Mac and those third-party devices. It's really great to see Automator here in macOS X Tiger and how it hasn't changed at all in the 20 years of its life. While Automator isn't as used today as it was back in 2005, and a lot of it's been replaced with shortcuts, especially on the Mac, at the end of the day, when you look at both of them side by side, the macOS X Tiger initial release of Automator and macOS Sequoia's release of Automator, they are identical apps. And it's so interesting to see how this one automated and scripting application that was built and kind of pitched as this way for any person to build scripting automation on their Mac essentially hasn't changed in 20 years. It's just so fascinating to see that. One last big features were small little improvements to iLife. I have another video planned as well talking about iLife, since it was such an interesting Apple software being released at that time, where it was kind of separate from their operating system updates and it was kind of this own self-contained suite of applications. But it's so fun to see the iLife applications again highlighted in these early versions of macOS X, including things like GarageBand, where they had this faux wood textured window that wasn't really in any other macOS application. And at the end of the day, a lot of the iLife applications experimented with UI elements and UI layouts that you really didn't see anywhere else again. And it's also interesting to see that the macOS X Tiger iLife suite didn't include iWeb. I remember using iWeb a ton when it came out in Mac. It must have been macOS X Leopard at this point. I loved iWeb. I built a lot of websites on iWeb. I have a whole nother kind of collection of videos that I want to work on just dedicated to iWeb. But it's so interesting to see that even in macOS X Tiger and all of its updates and all of its features, that iWeb actually wasn't included in it. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I have another one planned next week, hopefully, for Dashboard and going into some of the technical aspects of Dashboard. I think that will be a lot of fun as well.